What would you say if you discovered that beneath Old Berlin your family once guarded a symbol that fed on the blood of its own? A rune carved into cold iron. The odal, split in two, promised wealth and power, but always demanded a price. And now, nearly a century later, it has found its way back into your hands. The cellar of the Old Berlin house had never seemed truly empty. It didn't smell of simple dampness but of something else, the stale dust of time itself. On a gray September day in 2025, Lucas descended into that silence. Rain hammered against the iron roof above, each strike echoing like footsteps. Pushing aside rusted crates, he uncovered a wooden suitcase with tarnished brass corners. On its lid, faint and burned into the wood, was a rune, as if seared there by hot iron long ago. When the suitcase creaked open, the air filled with the scent of aged paper and cold metal. Inside lay yellowed letters, fragments of Berliner Tageblatt, and an old train ticket to Potsdam dated January 1932. But at the center was a heavy piece of iron, an amulet engraved with the odal rune, symbol of home and inheritance, split down the middle by a jagged crack. Even in Lucas's warm hand, the metal remained icy. At the very bottom rested a diary bound in dark brown leather. The first lines leapt out like a warning. They call it the Iron Sigil. But each time it demands a price from our bloodline. With each page, the world of 1932 came alive. Berlin appeared as a city of contrasts. Along Unter den Linden, neoclassical facades gleamed, marble columns towering above the passers-by. But a turn into Charlottenburg or Wedding revealed peeling courtyards, where children played in the dirt and men with hollow eyes argued over bread. The inflation of the 1920s had stripped away hope, and more turned to the promises of rising parties. In the diary's margins, his great-grandfather had scrawled, "The city rots, but in its basements, a new power is being born. Symbols forgotten since the pagan tribes are calling again." Lucas felt as though the words spoke directly to him. Every mention of the Iron Sigil sent a cold shiver through the amulet itself. A crumbling newspaper clipping described unrest in Potsdam, torchlit marches across the square. Hidden between the lines was the name of Professor Halbrecht, a figure tied to occult societies that the world would only later come to know. A photograph was tucked between the diary's pages. Two men in dark suits stared from the sepia print. His great-grandfather Cohen and his brother Matthias, twins. Between them, their hands rested on the same iron rune of odal. Their expressions were tense, as if they knew the camera was not capturing a portrait, but a sentence. The last diary entry, dated January 1932, trembled with uneven handwriting. "I heard the ringing, not the bells of the cathedral, but the ringing of iron, rising from the depths. They call me to where the walls remember more than men." Lucas snapped the diary shut. The cellar grew colder though the lamp still glowed. Outside, the rain poured on, each strike against the roof echoing differently now, like the toll of a distant, unseen bell. Berlin in the winter of 1932 was a city where even the cold felt political. Snow piled on Alexanderplatz lay gray, smeared with coal dust, while above, Zeppelins hummed like reminders that technology soared forward even as people sank into despair. Marching columns crowded the streets. Some in gray coats, some in black uniforms, each chanting their own slogans until the city trembled beneath the weight of clashing voices. In his diary, Cohen Dufresne wrote, "Berlin is split in two. On Unter den Linden the lights blaze, and the wealthy pour into theaters. In Wedding, children scratch at the snow for coal shards to feed the stove. The city stands on two legs, but one is bare." By January, Cohen spent his nights not in the office but in the basement of St. Nicholas Church. He and his brother Matthias had been drawn into a circle no one dared name aloud. It was said that Professor Halbrecht, renowned for his lectures on ancient Germanic runes, gathered families there, families willing to gamble their blood for power. In a letter to his brother, Cohen asked, "Are you certain we should go there? I've heard they ask not for money, but for the memories of our line. Are you ready to give up a part of our home for their symbol?" Matthias's reply was terse, anxious. "Either we cling to dusty past, or we build a future. The sigil is the key. Odal means home. I want our home to endure. The Berliner Tageblatt of January 19th carried a chilling note. Unexplained gatherings in the cellars of East Berlin unsettle residents. Witnesses claim they heard the ringing of iron like bells, though the church itself was silent. Lucas, reading these fragments, felt the tension press through the decades. His ears seemed to hum with phantom sound. Cohen's account of that night burned on the page. Entering the crypt beneath the church, stone vaults dripping with moisture, torches casting jagged shadows. On the floor, a circle laid from ancient bricks, and in its center the iron amulet engraved with the Odal rune. Its crack glowed faintly, like an ember waiting to ignite. In the corner stood Professor Halbrecht, thin, with round spectacles and a skull-like face. His words: "The broken rune preserves the house, but every stone in the foundation must be bought. The price is always drawn from the bloodline." Cohen confessed in his diary, "I grew cold though fire surrounded me. I thought of our home in wedding, of mother's hands smelling of bread. And I understood that was the price." In the margin, Lucas found a rune drawn in blood or dark ink. Odal slashed twice across. Beneath it, his great-grandfather wrote, "The first trial has begun." In the cellar of 2025, the lamp flickered. Lucas lifted his eyes. For a heartbeat, it seemed he could hear, somewhere beyond the wall, the faint toll of iron, muffled, insistent. February 1932 held Berlin in a frozen grip. Icy fog drifted over the Spree, and the city seemed not to breathe, as if waiting for something. By evening the streets emptied, yet in the basements flames of torches flared. In his great-grandfather's diary, Lucas read, "We entered the crypt through a side door of the church. The stone steps were slick with moisture. The deeper we descended, the more the darkness clung to us. It felt not like we were going down, but back to those who had built these walls." The vaults beneath St. Nicholas Church stretched like roots into the earth. Torches burned in the corners, but their light did not dispel the dark. It only carved out fragments of it. In the center lay a circle of ancient bricks, and on a rough altar rested the iron amulet engraved with the Odal rune. Its crack glimmered faint red, like a coal beneath ash. Around the altar stood a dozen men and women, all in black cloaks. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, but each carried something personal. Family rings, military medals, locks of hair, children's toys. They laid these at the altar's base. It did not look like offering, but payment. Matthias held a cage, inside which a raven thrashed and screamed as if it already knew its fate. Cohen wrote that he wanted to stop his brother, but could not. In that moment I knew Matthias believed more deeply than I ever could. To him, the sigil was not a curse but a chance. Professor Halbrecht approached the altar. His gaunt face lit by flame looked skeletal, his round spectacles glinting crimson. He spoke softly, yet every ear caught his words. "The broken Odal is a house that must be built from blood. Without sacrifice it falls. With it, it endures." When Matthias opened the cage and set the raven upon the stone, the bird fell silent. At once, the crack in the amulet glowed brighter. From deep beneath the crypt came a sound, the toll of a bell struck underground. The cloaked figures bowed their heads. Cohen wrote, "I felt the chill of iron seep into my bones. The sigil was searching for me. I wanted to scream, but my tongue was heavy, and in Matthias's eyes burned the fire of one ready to pay any price." In the margin Lucas found a drawing, the Odal rune encircled, with lines stretching outward toward tiny silhouettes of people. Beneath it, "The bond is sealed." When Lucas lifted his head from the diary, the lamp in the cellar flickered. For a heartbeat he thought he saw, in the corner beyond the old crates, a shadow that looked far too much like a figure in a cloak. Berlin in March was gray and restless. Snow still clung to rooftops, but the streets were already muddy with thaw. Crowds filled Alexanderplatz with angry chants, demanding bread, work, and change. Yet beneath that noise, in places where sunlight never reached, Another kind of gathering was taking shape, one that no police patrol would dare disturb. Lucas read the entries slowly, each word weighing like stone. His great-grandfather's handwriting grew jagged, ink sometimes smudged as if the pen trembled. The rune was no longer just iron. When Halbrecht placed his hand upon it, the crack in the odal glowed like a vein pulsing. He said the sigil drinks, that it binds more tightly with each offering. The diary described a second meeting, this time not in the crypt of St. Nicholas, but in a forgotten chamber beneath the ruins of the old Franciscan monastery. The walls were scarred with soot from some long-ago fire, yet symbols had been carved freshly into the stones. Runes that looked crude, but hummed with intent. Matthias arrived first, carrying a small parcel wrapped in cloth. When he opened it, Cohen wrote, his brother revealed a silver locket, once belonging to their mother. He laid it upon the altar without hesitation. Halbrecht nodded. The entry continued. He spoke of bloodlines, of inheritance not of flesh but of vow. He said our family carried the mark long before we were born, that by breaking the rune we break ourselves unless we pay its price. Around them the others whispered. A woman named Frida brought a book of hymns with its pages torn out and replaced with scraps of parchment covered in red ink. A merchant placed gold coins, their surfaces scorched with strange patterns. One by one, objects of memory and value piled upon the stone slab. Then came the moment Cohen could hardly describe. Halbrecht drew a shallow cut across his palm and pressed it to the rune. The crack glowed brighter. He said it needed more, that it was hungry. Matthias followed without question. His blood ran onto the iron, and I saw the rune tremble, as if alive. When the torches flickered, for an instant I believed something breathed with us in the chamber, unseen yet near. The entry broke into hurried lines. Ink blurred, phrases incomplete. Lucas could imagine his great-grandfather writing in fear. I tried to leave. The stair was blocked. Shadows lengthened, though no one moved. The raven that had been laid upon the altar, dead days before, twitched. His beak opened. A sound came out that was not a bird's. The cloaked ones knelt. I could not breathe. Then silence. The page ended with a sentence scrawled in the margin. Matthias is lost to me. He belongs to the rune now. Lucas pushed back from the desk. His heart thudded. He could almost smell the damp stone and torch smoke, hear the scraping of metal against bloodied skin. The diary's next page began with a symbol drawn in heavy black ink. The odal rune, cracked through its center. A drop of crimson pressed into the paper, as though the writer had sealed it with blood instead of wax. April arrived with sleet that hammered the tram windows and turned the streets of Berlin into ribbons of black glass. Posters peeled from brick walls, revealing older slogans beneath, each layer promising a different salvation. Police whistles cut through the din on Friedrichstrasse. Brass bands blared on Unter den Linden. Factory sirens moaned at dawn and dusk like the city's own tired lungs. But Cohen wrote that none of it was the loudest sound in Berlin that month. Louder than speeches and marching boots was an iron ringing that no one else seemed to hear. It begins at my left ear, his diary read. Like a pin struck on a glass. Then it moves inside my head. I steady my hands by laying them flat on the desk. The odal is nowhere near me. Matthias keeps it, but the sound grows stronger every night. Matthias had vanished from the apartment they shared in wedding. He appeared only at odd hours, smelling of cold stone and smoke, his eyes bright and distant. He ate quickly, smiled softly at nothing, and left again. Once, Cohen caught his sleeve and saw a dark thread stitched under Matthias's skin along the wrist. No wound, not quite a scar, but a line like a fine seam. When Cohen gasped, Matthias pulled his sleeve down and said, almost kindly, "It's only the price." The newspapers took on a feverish tone. The Berliner Tageblatt railed against torchlight parades that multiplied each week. The Völkischer Beobachter celebrated order rising from chaos. A column in the Morgenpost mentioned rumors of clandestine societies, repurposing medieval cellars as lecture halls for restorative heritage rights. Names were never printed. Addresses were hinted. A stable off Klosterstrasse, a laundry near Spandauer Strasse, a bricked arch by the river where the stones sweated in April's thaw. Cohen followed the hints. In one basement he found only damp and rats, in another a chalk circle half-scrubbed from the floor. But in the third, a narrow cellar with a coal chute and a dozen stools, he found people. Some wore the same plain coats he did. Others had the clipped hair and careful posture of officers who had not yet become officers. None spoke at first. Then a woman he recognized as Frida opened a wooden box and drew out pieces of iron. Slivers, curls, filings. Each was stained a faint reddish-brown, as if long kept in a butcher's apron. "Fragments of the sigil," she said. "It grows by division." Cohen stared. "If it's broken, doesn't it lose its power?" "Not this one," came a voice behind him, the thin, patient voice of Professor Halbrecht. "The odal you hold in mind is an etching on paper. The one we work with is older than writing. It is a house, Cohen. Houses do not vanish when a stone is displaced. They spread new walls, new rooms, new doors for the same inhabitants." The evening uncoiled like a lit fuse. Coins were placed in a bowl and blackened with a candle's soot. A ribbon was cut into pieces and knotted around wrists. For the first time, Cohen saw the ritual enacted not as spectacle but as administration, measured, neat, almost bureaucratic. Someone recorded names. Another noted items relinquished. A pocket watch engraved Fur Ernst, a locket with a child's curl, a ledger's last page torn out and offered, each offering a brick in a foundation no one could see, yet everyone felt forming beneath them. When they finished, Halbrecht held up a thin iron fragment and pressed it into Cohen's palm. It burned cold. "You will carry it," he said. "Not the whole. A house is steadier when the weight is borne by many." Cohen nearly dropped it. "I never agreed to." "You crossed the threshold when you read your brother's name in the register," Halbrecht replied. "Blood climbed the stairs behind you. There is no back door." That night, the ringing in Cohen's ear did not wait for darkness. It vibrated through the afternoon as he walked past the copper dome of the new synagogue, past cafes where revolution wore a bow tie and argued with itself, past kiosks where newsprint bled onto fingers. The city was all metal. Tram rails, factory gates, lantern poles, and every metal thing seemed to hum with the same frequency. As if far below the pavements a hidden bell was struck again and again. Matthias reappeared at dawn 2 days later, carrying a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table without ceremony. When Cohen untied the cord, he found a small iron ring within, plain, heavy, stamped inside with a rune so shallow it looked like a flaw. "Put it on," Matthias said. "No." Matthias's smile did not waver. It only thinned. "You already wear it." He touched Cohen's chest with 2 fingers, exactly over the sternum. "You think your fear keeps you clean? Fear is consent in a softer coat." The ring fit as if his finger had been shaped around it. It was not tight, but he could not remove it later. He tried soap, oil, a thread trick he'd learned in school. The skin tugged, but the iron would not pass the knuckle. In the mirror, Cohen hardly knew his own hand. He searched for sanity in public places. The Pergamon Museum's cool halls, the Roman gate reconstructed stone by stone, the altar that once devoured offerings in another age. He traced the marble friezes and told himself the ancient world had seen 1,000 rites and survived them all. But when he stepped onto Museum Island, the sky cracked with a sound like thunder, and no cloud hung there. Pigeons flurried from the eaves. A child cried, and the iron ring grew colder on his finger until the bone ached. He wrote to his mother in hesitant phrases he never sent. He wrote to himself in lines that looped into knots. Matthias says foundation. Halbrecht says house. But what house requires walls of names? The fragment in his pocket vibrated so softly he suspected he imagined it, until he set it on the table and saw dust shift around it as if the air itself were disturbed. At month's end, an unsigned note slid under the apartment door, Vorsicht. 2 crossings inked below the word, like a child's ruined tic-tac-toe. Cohen went downstairs and found the courtyard silent, laundry lines empty, the pump handle tied with string. From an upper window a radio spilled a speech full of order and destiny. From the alley a drunk sang something hopeless and sweet. Somewhere, deeper than the noise, the iron rang. He returned to the table where the oilcloth had been. The parcel was gone. Matthias had taken it. But beneath the oil stain, where the iron ring had rested, the grain of the wood had darkened into a faint, unmistakable shape. The cracked odal spread like roots. Cohen shut his eyes. The city, the century, the skin on his wrist. It all felt like one continuous surface, and the sigil had pressed its pattern into it. He opened the diary and wrote in a slow, careful hand, "If the sigil is a house, it is building on me." The lamp flickered, though the valve was steady. A breath of cold moved through the room with no open window to cause it. And then, from the stairwell beyond the apartment door, came a sound he knew now better than any human voice, the patient, measured tolling of iron, counting out a price that rose with every beat. When thunder rolls in clear skies, do not scream, Matthias had once whispered. Cohen did not scream. He picked up the pen. The page blurred under water he hadn't felt spill. He wrote one more sentence before the ink ran to gray. "Tomorrow I will go to the address Frida slipped into my pocket. If they have begun to carve the rune into stone, I must see with my own eyes whose names they use for mortar." Rain came early to Berlin that May, soaking the red banners strung across Wilhelmstrasse and turning them into streaks of rust. The city seemed carved in halves. The noise of parades on the wide boulevards, and the silence of basements where shadows sat waiting. Cohen moved between both worlds, invisible in each. By day he bought bread, nodded at neighbors, kept his collar up against the drizzle. By night, he followed whispers to the places where the sigil had begun to etch itself into stone. The address Frida had slipped into his pocket led him to the ruins of a half-bombed warehouse on the banks of the Spree. The war had ended more than a decade earlier, yet the city still bore the scars. Jagged bricks like broken teeth, iron beams rising against the gray sky. Inside, the air smelled of wet ash. Lanterns burned low in iron cages. A dozen men and women stood in a circle around a slab of granite hauled from God knows where. And on that stone, someone had carved it. The cracked odal, sharp as lightning, gouged deep enough that dust still clung in the grooves. Professor Halbrecht was there, his thin hands folded like wings. "At last," he whispered. "It stands where no man can erase it." Cohen's chest tightened. "You said it was an idea." A symbol passed hand to hand. "Why cut it into stone?" Halbrecht's eyes shone. "Ideas fade, ink burns, flesh dies, but stone endures." He tapped the slab with a stick of chalk. "This will be our altar, our archive, our anchor." They began to work. One by one, people stepped forward and pressed offerings against the carved lines. A wedding band, a lock of hair, a silver coin bent nearly in half. Each object vanished into the grooves as if the granite swallowed them. Cohen blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the truth remained. Metal and flesh sinking into cold stone like water into sand. When his turn came, he froze. The iron ring on his finger tightened, drawing blood where it pinched the skin. Halbrecht's gaze bore into him. "You carry the house within. Now feed its foundation." With trembling hands, Cohen pulled from his coat pocket the fragment of iron Frida had given him. For a heartbeat he thought of throwing it into the Spree, but the stone seemed to lean closer, demanding. He set the fragment onto the sigil. It shuddered, hummed, and was gone, pulled into the carved crack. The ringing in his ears flared so loudly he nearly fell. Outside, thunder rolled though the sky was clear. The days blurred into sleepless nights. Cohen wandered the pergamon once more, staring at the Ishtar Gates lions, blue as the drowned sky. He told himself he was studying history, but the thought that gnawed him was simpler. What if the past is not past at all? What if it is a hand still writing? Berlin pulsed with contradictions. Crowds marched with torches down Unter den Linden, chanting unity, while starving children begged by Alexanderplatz. At night, Cohen traced the alleyways to watchworkers haul bricks to the cellar on Klosterstrasse. Each brick bore faint scratches, meaningless to most, but to him they looked like runes half-scrubbed by time. Matthias appeared less and less, yet when he did, Cohen noticed changes. His brother's eyes glowed faintly in darkness, reflecting lantern light where no lantern burned. Veins darkened along his throat. His smile was too steady, as though it had been carved rather than chosen. "Why are you doing this?" Cohen begged one night, rain hammering the window behind them. Matthias only replied, "So our name will outlast the century." "What do you want, brother? To vanish in the dust, or to be written into the stone?" Cohen slammed his fist onto the table. "Written with blood, with theft, with silence. That is not memory, it is disease." Matthias leaned forward. "Call it disease if you like, but disease spreads. That is its strength." The next gathering was not in a basement but in the open air, beneath the dripping trees of Treptower Park. A ring of lanterns marked the place, though passers-by would have seen nothing but fog. Halbrecht raised a hand and recited words half German, half unreadable, carved syllables that cracked in Cohen's skull. Around them, the granite slab had been raised onto a cart, its carved sigil shining faintly as though lit from within. Cohen watched in horror as Matthias pressed his palm to the stone. Blood welled from a thin cut in his hand, ran into the grooves and vanished. The stone glowed brighter. "Do you see?" Halbrecht murmured. "It answers now. It breathes." And Cohen heard it, the faintest exhalation, as if the granite itself sighed with hunger. The diary entry for May 20th was almost unreadable, ink smeared by rain or tears. The sigil no longer waits for stone or paper. It is in the air. When thunder rolls through clear skies, the city shakes. When Matthias looks at me, I see not his face but a mirror where my own eyes burn back at me. The house is growing. The walls are names. And I am mortar. At the bottom of the page, scrawled hastily, "If the house spreads, it will not stop with Berlin. I must break the stone, or it will write the century itself." Summer did not arrive in Berlin with warmth, but with a suffocating heaviness that pressed on the city like a lid. The air was thick, heavy with coal dust and stagnant water from the spree. Even when the parades filled Unter den Linden with banners and marching boots, beneath the spectacle there lingered something unseen, a current that moved in silence. Lucas turned another page of his great-grandfather's diary, his fingers trembling at the jagged handwriting. "The air hums when I stand near the sigil. People speak nothing, yet I hear a chorus. Some see flashes of light in the dark. Others, they see their own doubles reflected in pools of water." The entries described a gathering one night in June beneath an old bridge crossing the Spree. The river lapped quietly against the stone foundations, while above, the city was restless, its trams clattering and its taverns glowing with weak gaslight. But here, under the arch, the stone slab had been dragged once more into the open air. The cracked odal rune gleamed faintly as if it absorbed the moisture from the mist. Lightning flickered across the sky though no storm broke. The air was bone-dry, humming with static. Men and women in coats stood in a ring, their faces lit only by lanterns shielded with iron cages. And in the center, Matthias. Lucas imagined the scene. His great-grandfather's brother, his eyes too bright, his stance no longer that of an ordinary man but of someone claimed by something greater or darker. He stood with stillness too perfect, his hands clasped before him as if carved from stone. The chanting began low, wordless at first, then swelling into strange syllables that were neither Latin nor German. The rune's lines glowed with a dull red, like embers hidden deep inside a furnace. One of the new initiates stumbled forward, clutching his chest, choking as if the air itself rejected him. His cries were muffled by the chanting, drowned beneath the rhythm. Professor Halbrecht raised a skeletal hand. "When the stone breathes," he intoned, "the city breathes with it." And then Berlin itself seemed to answer. From across the river, the bells of a church rang suddenly, though the towers were dark and abandoned. The sound rolled like thunder through the empty night. The diary went on. "The city is no longer streets and bricks. It becomes part of the house. Its walls are made of names. Its corridors stretch through alleys. People themselves are the mortar, filling the hollow spaces. Lucas paused, his chest tightening. Could a city remember whispers? Could streets hold breath? Even now, nearly a century later, he felt the same tension when he walked Berlin at night, the sense that the walls leaned inward, listening. By the end of June, the diary described a new sign. On the walls near Alexanderplatz, crude scratches had appeared. To passers-by they were meaningless graffiti, marks drawn with coal dust. But to those who knew, the message was unmistakable. The cracked odal rune, black as soot. "The house grows," the entry whispered. The final note chilled Lucas more than the rest. I watched Matthias stare at his reflection in a window. He smiled before he did. Berlin sweltered under a summer that felt more like fever than warmth. By day, the city was a furnace of clattering trams, marching columns, and shouting vendors. But by night, when the crowds thinned and the streets emptied into silence, something else pressed against the skin of the city, as if the stones themselves had begun to listen. Cohen's entries for July grew longer, more frantic. Lucas read them by lamplight, the ink spreading across the fragile paper like veins of shadow. "They moved the stone again," one page began. "Not to the river nor the cellar, but to the very heart. A factory abandoned after the war. The walls are black with soot. The roof is half collapsed. And yet, when the sigil was placed there, the air thickened as if the ruin became whole again." He described the night in detail. A dry storm broke across Berlin, lightning streaking without rain. The cracked odal rune pulsed on the granite slab, each vein glowing as if alive. The congregation was larger than ever. Merchants, clerks, widows, even boys in worn jackets who should have been home asleep. They formed a circle in the factory, their shadows dancing on charred walls. Halbrecht stood at the center, his voice thin but sharp, cutting through the storm. "The house grows. Its pillars rise not from stone but from bloodlines. Tonight we seal another wall." Then Matthias stepped forward. Lucas's stomach twisted as he read the words. "My brother held a child," the diary said. "Not his own. Where he found him, I do not know. The boy's eyes were wide, but he did not cry. Matthias laid him on the stone. The rune brightened. The air roared like a furnace. Cohen's script broke, smears across the page. Lucas forced himself to keep reading. Halbrecht pressed his hand to the sigil. Flames rose from the cracks in the slab, but did not burn the boy. "They burned us." The congregation screamed, but no one moved away. The pain chained us in place. I felt my own skin split with light. The entry faltered into fragments. A sound like bells underwater. The boy vanished. Only ash remained. Matthias's eyes were no longer his. Lucas leaned back, breath shallow. He could almost hear the echo of that night. The factory filled with fire that did not consume wood or cloth but lives, names, histories. The following page was worse. I tried to run. The doors were shut though no hands closed them. The walls bent like ribs around us. Halbrecht spoke. "The house is nearly whole. The century will bow." When I looked up, I saw windows where no windows were, filled not with glass but with eyes. They watched from the dark, dozens, hundreds, all unblinking. The last line of the July entries was scratched so hard it tore the paper. "Matthias no longer walks beside me. He walks inside the stone." Lucas dropped the diary onto the desk. Outside his own window, thunder rolled across a clear summer sky, just as it had in Berlin nearly a century before. August fell on Berlin like a fever dream. The air shimmered with heat by day, yet nights were restless, filled with sudden winds that rattled shutters and stirred dust from the war-scarred ruins. People whispered of strange sounds in the alleys. Footsteps when no one walked, bells ringing without a tower, shadows that stretched too long against the gaslight. Lucas turned another brittle page. His great-grandfather's script was erratic now, ink spattered, letters tilting like a hand that could not stop trembling. "The house has left the stone," one entry began. "It has grown legs and walks among us. I see its mark everywhere, on the walls, on the faces of men in the markets, even in the sky when lightning flickers with no storm. The gathering of August was unlike the others. No cellar, no bridge, no hidden chamber. This time they stood openly in the courtyard of the burned-out rothouse, its blackened arches rising like broken teeth. Hundreds gathered, their lanterns forming a circle that flickered like a halo of fireflies. At the center stood the sigil stone, hauled there by hands that bled. Its carved odal rune now split into countless smaller cracks, each glowing with a dull crimson. Halbrecht raised both arms, his voice carrying through the night. The city itself bends to us. Each wall, each tower, each alley, they are bricks of the house. Tonight, Berlin becomes foundation. The crowd answered with a single guttural sound. Lucas felt his stomach twist at the thought of it. Not chant, not prayer, but something older, hungrier. Matthias appeared then. He wore no hat, his hair damp with sweat, his eyes like mirrors catching every flicker of light. Beside him walked Frida, holding a ledger. She read aloud names from its pages. Dozens of them, families known to the city, shopkeepers, students, children. For each name, a torch was raised, and the rune flared. The diary quivered into madness. I saw the air ripple. Windows in the rothouse glowed though no fire burned inside. The walls leaned, listening. When Matthias spoke, his voice echoed not once but a dozen times, as though the city repeated him. He said, "The house is built on silence. Tonight we lay the roof." Cohen tried to flee. He wrote of running down Königstrasse, but the street itself seemed endless, curving back to the same courtyard. Each alley led him to another wall scratched with the broken odal. Even the tramlines hummed with that same rhythm, as though the iron rails carried the chant. The page darkened with smudges where rain or sweat had blurred the ink. People are vanishing, not just into stone but into air. I watched a woman stumble, her shadow stretched, and when it snapped back, she was gone. Only her shoes remained. The congregation cheered. They said the house was hungry. The entry closed with a chilling line, scratched deep enough to tear the paper. Matthias looked at me across the courtyard. My mouth formed his words before he spoke them. Lucas pressed the diary shut, but even in silence he thought he heard that echo. Words spoken by one voice, repeated by another, until no one knew which lips had moved first. September bled into Berlin with storms that never brought rain. Thunder rolled across cloudless skies, and people swore they saw faces in the flashes, pale outlines staring from the heavens. The city grew restless. Strikes, rallies, fires in the tenements, chaos above ground. But below, in chambers that no police dared chart, another kind of storm raged. Lucas read the final entries with a tight throat. The paper was warped, edges eaten by mold, but the words were etched in panic. The sigil no longer belongs to stone or flesh, Cohen had written. It walks the streets in every reflection. The house has no walls because the city is its wall. When I pass a window, it smiles before I do. When I speak, my brother's voice answers in my chest. The last gathering took place in the ruins of the Kaiser Wilhelm Church, its shattered spire looming against the twilight. Hundreds filled the nave, their lanterns flickering like souls trapped in glass. The sigil stone was gone, or rather, it had dissolved into dust. Its fragments spread among the congregation. Each bore a shard, and when they lifted their palms, the air shimmered red. Halbrecht's voice rose like a dirge. No more altar, no more walls. Tonight the house becomes air, and all who breathe are part of it. Then Matthias stepped forward. His eyes were glassy, his face calm, but when he smiled, Lucas swore he felt it from across time. A smile that reached into him like cold fingers. The diary described the impossible. The walls groaned. The city bent. I saw Brandenburg Gate twist as if it were wood. I saw the Spree flow backward. Bells rang in towers that had no bells. And in the midst, Matthias dissolved like smoke, and I knew he was not leaving. He was spreading. Cohen tried to run. His words scrawled frantically. I stumbled into Friedrichstrasse, but the people there were chanting though they knew no words. Their mouths moved, their eyes blank. I realized the house had opened every door. No escape, no silence. The sigil had written itself into the century. The final page bore only one sentence, pressed so hard the paper tore through. If you are reading this, the house has already found you. Lucas closed the diary. His apartment in modern Berlin felt suddenly smaller, the air too heavy. Outside, traffic roared, neon signs flashed. But behind the noise lay something older, a rhythm too steady to be chance. He caught his reflection in the darkened window. For a heartbeat, it smiled before he did. He shoved the diary away, but the words would not leave him. The thunder he'd heard earlier returned, low and steady, though the forecast promised clear skies. Somewhere, faintly, a church bell rang where no church stood. And now, here is where the diary ends, but not the story. Because you, watching this, have heard it too. Perhaps you thought it was only a story, another tale of ruins and rituals. But if the house spreads through breath, through whispers, through words spoken aloud, then by listening you have stepped inside its walls. So tell me, when you pass a mirror tonight, will your reflection wait for you to smile? Or will it already be smiling?